Okay, before we go into questions, we have Niels, who has a demo that he'd like to show off and get some feedback from. So, Niels, I'm going to hand to you to do that.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, everybody. This is I just got started with Semantic Kernel, so I'm kind of new in this world. I work for AssemblyAI, and so us as a company, we use a lot of AI to provide the best transcription services there are. So my goal was here to integrate that essentially into Semantic Kernel, so we could plug it into planners and whatever could be necessary by Semantic Kernel users. So let me share my screen. So I have a sample project here open, and let me just focus on the specific, the relevant pieces. So we have the transcript plugin here, and I added a Boolean to make sure that by default it wouldn't be able to access the file system, but I enabled that here so I can, and that's just because sometimes the audio files might be locally stored, and so we do want to support that uploading those files. But by default, we expect people to pass in URLs like you can see here. Let me just, so here is an example of how you would use the plugin. So you get the transcript plugin function for transcribe. You invoke it with the variables, which is the audio URL.
Niels, can we zoom in a little bit more?
Oh yeah, sure. There we go. So normally we have a lot more options, but I just wanted to get the most basic functionality ready and to demonstrate. And so the result of that would be the transcript itself. Now I have a second function as well, which uses the planner. Same thing, except I'm not explicitly telling it to use the plugin. It's instead figuring out using the plugin descriptions which plugin to use. I also added a different plugin that kind of figures out, hey, I said downloads folder, so it's gonna generate the common file path for the current operating system, and then try to find the file and upload it. So let me run that. This is gonna take a little bit, so maybe I should have just start running it and then start talking. Now, I also submitted some questions. I don't know if we'll get to that later, but they're essentially related to developing this plugin.
And you're calling an external service, right? Through API key.
Yeah, it's an API.
It's not a local service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, it's not a local service. So we have the results from the first method, which is this transcript. And then here you can see how the plan is figuring out how to use the common folder name, pass in the file name, and then so this is that our plugin I was talking about, find files in common folders, and that passing that into the audio URL parameter for the transcript plugin, and the results of that should also be the transcript. Now I had a different sample, but it was getting too complicated, so I didn't want to add that in where I should do Q&A on top of this, but that was getting too far away from the plugin itself. All right. Is there anything else that you would like me to show from this, or is that good?
This is very cool. No, I like it. I like that it works.
Yeah. Well, I had some questions, but I think I linked to that. So instead of continuing to share the demo, maybe we can just get to the questions.
And of course, anyone in the chat or in the community, feel free to come off mute, raise your hand if you want to give Niels feedback on this plugin.
Yeah, so the first question I had was how should we throw exceptions? Should we catch our exceptions and then return the error message as a string? So a planner could parse it and then see if they can continue, or what's the best approach? Should the semantic kernel framework itself take care of it?
Great question. Doug, go ahead.
If it's an exception, it should throw it. I mean, I'm almost positive that in a system I'm building, one of the first things I'm going to do is jettison most of Planner outside of the core feature set and use durable task library, right, for retries and all that stuff. So I need it to be transparent and not deal with, attempt to deal with it itself and hide what's happening on the inside to be able to compensate. I don't know if other people agree with that, but that's my take.
Yeah, it
I'd
seems
be-
like behind the scenes, there's been quite a few PRs the last couple of weeks, normalizing how exceptions get thrown, and they're all following the .NET standard practice now. It's way less like SK specific stuff, like storing that exception in like a last exception property and not throwing. And it's more like throw it and let your, catch handler take care of it.
So these should just be whatever exception it is. It shouldn't be wrapped in like a specific exception provided by SK.
No, it should be a real exception so that
Okay.
you can only ambiguously identify what it was, but it shouldn't handle it. Or if it
Cool.
does handle it, it should still throw it.
Yeah, I think there's a dedicated decision record for this. I'll try to find it and throw it in the chat because I think this was all discussed by the SK team.
I was wondering if you guys ever consider using a result structure to return back the thing so you can see success or not. That would be, it's a clean way in my opinion, but how I was thinking about it.
So I see Teresa is actually on the call. I'd be curious from the chat Copilot perspective how team handles this.
So this is
you're-
actually something we're trying to figure out right now too. We just had to change one of our error handlers to catch a generic exception. So I don't have a straightforward answer to this, but we are talking about it.
Yeah, so I wanted to maybe share what we did to give you an idea. We did go down the route of returning a result initially, but what we found is that standardizing things to exceptions made it easier to catch the exceptions and specifically their types. And even within the exceptions, because we're using an implementation of semantic kernel in Python, within the exceptions, there was information on why specifically, obviously, the exception occurred. So just at the base level, when we're calling that function that does everything, we had a catch, and then we could just very cleanly in one area have exceptions that are typed instead of returning a result. And so I'm personally a proponent for throwing exceptions and catching them. That's all.
Yeah, I think
Sounds good.
right now we're pretty much following the same practice that was just described. I don't know who was talking, but where we're throwing the exception and then we're parsing a specific error message to handle different cases.
Cool. But good question.
Thank you. All right. So next one is like, what would the best way be to pass the API key to a plugin? Right now, I'm passing it through the constructor, but would it be recommended to like pass it through a parameter, or what you're thinking on this?
I currently pass mine through a constructor. I just think it's pretty standard, and then save it to a private variable.
And is there like a dependency injection system that semantic kernel supports, or would it be preferred to like integrate it with .NET standard dependency injection system?
Right.
So for Chat Copilot, what we do is I can send you some links to this. Is we have different authentication provider classes that basically wrap around the token, and it's called as the auth callback whenever whatever function within that plugin is invoked. So I can send you that to show you an example of how we do it in Chat Copilot.
Yeah, that sounds good. I just want to make sure if I provide a plugin to the ecosystem that it's following, the way that it's expected to be done.
Yeah, there is an auth callback parameter with every time you register a plugin, so we would recommend that way.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering this, like how would you use a semantic functions within a native function? Because from one native function, I would like to call a semantic function, but like, is there like right now I could do it by passing in the kernel and then creating like a template and function and registering the function, but then it's also like registered with the kernel, but I don't really want to expose it outside of my native function. I just want it like to be private essentially. Is there like a way to do that?
I'll give a quick thought. I don't know if it's the right thought, but I think you can instantiate many versions of multiple instances of the kernel, right? Even inside a function, if you really wanted to. So that scope, right, that function scope could just have that kernel and not be the, what I call it, meta kernel that you're working with. So that's one option, one way.
So you could like make a copy of this kernel, use it, and then yeah.
I don't know if copy is the right word. Maybe just instantiate a brand new one.
Well, so because I'm providing this as a plugin, so I don't really want to decide how the kernel is configured. I want that to be the responsibility of the consumer.
I see.
Would you just dependency inject iKernel into your function? And assuming you set it up as scoped, it should just use the same kernel in your function?
Yeah, but I don't want to register the function into it because I only want it to be private to me. Because when I did register like this function into the kernel, it started being used inside of the sequential planner and whatnot, and would start messing up the results there.
Yeah, I've also kind of run into a similar issue. Like the kernel exposes the prompt template engine, right? And it makes creating these semantic functions inline pretty nice. But yeah, kind of like you're saying, it gets then picked up by the planner and stuff like that. I don't know if this works because I haven't finished it yet, but if I remember correctly, there was some example and there's a way to actually create your own skill collection to pass to the kernel. I'm not sure if that got refactored because there's been a lot of refactorings going on. But you could build the kernel, tell it to use its own skill collection, add the semantic function just to that new skill collection, and then once you return from the method, it's out of scope. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
I also did a workaround where I split the native function into two. So you had the before, the semantic, then the after. I mean, that's something that I did as a workaround before.
Yeah, the planner also has support for excluded functions, so you can pass in a list of functions that you want excluded from the planner.
Niels, any other questions from this or?
No, but I did want to turn this around and say, like, give this as feedback. It would be cool if we could have semantic functions kind of side by side inside of a plugin like this. So, like, instead of having to register it, just have it using attributes or like be able to return the config, and then when a consumer registers the plugin, then the semantic functions and the native functions would kind of be registered in one way, if that makes sense.
That's good feedback. I'll definitely pass it to the team.